They do not want you to understand this. For over 1,000 years, whole books of our lives have been erased and forgotten, and changed by those in charge. The history you learned in school is a carefully planned trick meant to keep you dumb, obedient, and Gnostics knew this because they saw it. Through the lie, they understood that the God adored by billions wasn't the true creator, but an imposter, a cosmic fraud who stole life and locked people up in a false world. This is documented in ancient texts, works that the church tried to destroy, knowledge that was hunted down and burned in an attempt to erase the truth, but some of it survived. And what it shows is nothing short of mind-breaking. At the core of Gnostic cosmos lies a being known as Bythos, the primal unknown source, pure, boundless life beyond anything we can comprehend from this source. Emanations of divine wisdom called Aeons poured forth, each one an aspect of the supreme truth. These Aeons weren't gods in the way most people understand gods. They weren't jealous, wrathful masters, demanding obedience. They were signs of pure essence, knowledge, wisdom, light, power, and yet today, most of them are completely lost. Why? Because knowledge is dangerous, because those who understand the true structure of reality become impossible to manipulate. Because the Aeon, if remembered, would reveal the entire lie that holds this world together. One of the most significant and most carefully erased Aeon is Horus, the cosmic line. He is the great separator, the force that separates the pure divine world of the plasma from the corrupted, broken world of matter. Without him, chaos would eat life. But here's the key: Horus didn't just separate the divine from the physic. He also stood between the real God and the fake God. And this is where everything unravels. The Gnostics claimed that an immense tragedy occurred within the divine realms, one that went to the creation of the Demiurge, the being worried as God by billions today. But the Demiurge is not the true creator. He is an accident, the residue of a single eon's mistaken attempt to create without divine balance. That eon was Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, but her creation was flawed, and out of that flaw emerged a blind, arrogant, power-hungry entity. This entity, the Demiurge, was cut off from true divinity. He didn't know where he came from, but he saw the raw chaos of the world and declared himself its master in his fantasy. He thought he was the only god. He built a jail out of matter and called it the physical world. He filled it with souls trapped in flesh, bound to the mirage of reality, and he set up an order of archons, cosmic parasites, to enforce his rule. But the Aeons knew the truth. They saw the false god for what he was, and Horus, the great separator, stood as the last defense, the final veil between the true divine world and the prison of matter. If his presence had been understood, if his wisdom had survived mainstream history, the entire system of religious rule would collapse overnight, because once you recognize the structure of reality, you are no longer a slave to it. So what did they do? They erased it. The early church, named the Gnostics as heretics, hunted them down and burned their texts. The most powerful Gnostic sources, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Truth, the Valentinian explanation, were destroyed in massive purges. Only by chance, through hidden stores, like the Nag Hammadi library, did some of this information survive, but even now the truth remains buried. The idea that the God of the Old Testament might not be the true creator that the world we live in is a lie that forgotten Aeons once stood as our guides and guardians. These are ideas that challenge everything people have been conditioned to believe. Abaddon. The name alone carries weight, whispered in ancient books, feared in apocalyptic dreams, and deliberately obscured by religious authorities. You've heard of angels and demons, but Abaddon, he doesn't fit nicely into either category. He's something else entirely. A force that doesn't bow to simplistic notions of good and evil. A power that doesn't serve the false god of this world, but works on a level beyond human morals, and that's exactly why they don't want you to understand what he really is. The popular version of Abaddon is a one-dimensional scare tactic. If you dig into the book of Revelation, hear that angel of the abyss, the boss of the endless pit, the bringer of destruction in Hebrew. The name means destruction, or stom in Greek. He's called Aeolion. The destroyer sounds simple, right? Some scary underworld demon, something straight out of a Sunday school horror. That's what they want you to think. But the ancient Gnostic and esoteric books tell a completely different story. To understand Abaddon, you have to understand what he ruins, not just cities, not just nations. He destroys illusions. He tears down the veil that keeps humanity blind. He is a force of entropy against the false order forced by the Demiurge. And that makes him a threat, not to us, but to the system that enslaves us, you see, in Gnostic and Kabbalistic customs. Abaddon isn't just some doomsday monster waiting to be unleashed at the end of time. He's a gatekeeper, the one who stands at the threshold between this corrupt stuff prison and the realms beyond is Abyss. It isn't some pit of damnation. It's a passageway, a route out of the demi-dominion. That's why he's feared. That's why his name is linked with damage, because he doesn't just destroy, he erases power. The Zohar, one of the foundational books of Jewish mysticism, describes Abaddon as the depths that devours Fuits. Not just physical damage, but conceptual destruction. The fall of illusions, the obliteration of lies. He doesn't serve the Demiurge, he stands in direct opposition to it. And in certain esoteric traditions, Abaddon is said to be the very force that will one day fall, the false reality we are trapped in. That's why his job is so distorted in popular theology. The Book of Revelation paints him as a servant of heavenly wrath, unleashed to torture the wicked. But let's be clear who describes a wicked. If the God of this world is a fake, then what does it mean to be judged by him? The Gnostics thought that Abaddon was no mere angel of destruction, but a force of purification, a being whose presence signals the breaking of control. And here's something else they don't want you to know. Abaddon isn't just some figure hiding in ancient prophecy. He has been summoned, called upon, known by secret societies, mystics and occultists for ages, the alchemists of the Middle Ages, the Kabbalists of medieval Spain, the initiates of the Hermetic orders. All of them understand that destruction isn't inherently evil. It's transformation, the end of one system and the beginning of another. The old world feared him because they understood what he represented. The fall of power systems, the disintegration of control, the return to something purer, something beyond the limits of the real world in Gnostic cosmology. Abaddon's abyss wasn't a penalty. It was an escape route, a void where the false constructs of this world dissolve, left only the truth. And that more than anything else is what those in power fear. So why is Abaddon vilified? Because no empire, no ruling class, no system built on control can afford to admit a force that exists solely to unmake their dominion. He is the reckoning, the one who cannot be traded with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bought or tricked into submission. He is the image of something they cannot control because he is the force that breaks control itself. Horus. You've never heard of him, and that's not an accident. His name has been stripped from religious doctrine, buried under ages of theological censoring. The reason Horus is dangerous not in a way that threatens humanity, but in a way that threatens the entire system that keeps humanity under control. Because if you truly understand Horus, you understand the limit. The dividing line between reality and illusion, between divinity and the false construct placed by the Demiurge. Horus isn't just another forgotten eon. He is the barrier itself, the force that splits the infinite, incorruptible divine world, the ploma from the faulty and decaying material world. His job isn't about creation or destruction. It's about success. He holds back what doesn't fit. And more importantly, he ensures that what has been cast out stays out. So why is that a problem? Because it reveals the greatest lie ever told, the idea that this material world is all there is, that the God of this world is the greatest power, and that you are nothing more than a mortal being stuck in a decaying body. The presence of Horus proves otherwise. He was placed as a cosmic safeguard, not to keep humanity out of divinity, but to keep something else from creeping back in. The Gnostics didn't just claim that the material world was a flawed imitation of the true God order. They believed that the force ruling over it, the so-called God of mainstream faith, was an imposter, a mistake born from a catastrophic split within the ploma. This being, the Demiurge, was sealed off from the true divine source, and Horus, he was the lock, but locks work both ways. Horus didn't just cut the Demiurge off from the Ploma. He also trapped divine sparks inside the material world. That means you, your soul, the part of you that doesn't belong to this fact. The Gnostics understood this, and they knew that breaking free from this world wasn't about waiting for salvation. It was about transcending the barrier. But to do that, you have to identify it first. This is where Horus becomes more than just an Aeon. He becomes a challenge, a test that only those who are ready can pass in some esoteric traditions. He is pictured not as a benevolent guardian, but as a hurdle, a force that intentionally prevents souls from avoiding the material illusion. Until they are ready, the Valentinian Gnostics called this the Great Limit, the final threshold between ignorance and information. Only those who attain true gnosis inner knowledge could pass beyond Horus and re-enter the divine world. This flips the entire religious story upside down. If Horus exists, then saving isn't about obedience. It's not about praising the Demiurge or following rules that keep you emotionally blind. It's about remembering, understanding who you really are, and earning your way back to the divine, because Horus doesn't keep you out. He keeps out those who aren't ready, and most of humanity lost in the distractions and lies of the stuff. World is not ready. Aeon were never meant to be worshipped. They weren't gods in the way the popular world understands gods. They were emanations, forces of pure knowledge, life and power that emerged from the infinite source of truth itself. But somewhere along the way, that knowledge was buried, twisted, and rebranded as apostasy. And the reason? Because the Aeon weren't just cosmic entities. They were the key to humanity's escape in popular religion. Salvation is a deal. You accept, you believe, and in return you're allowed entry into paradise. The Gnostics, they called on that idea to them. Rescue wasn't something given. It was something won, and it had nothing to do with faith or respect. It had everything to do with gnosis, the direct understanding of the divine that the Aeon provided. The Aeons weren't far away. Untouchable beings, they were actively interested in guiding lost souls back to their true roots in Valentinian Gnosticism. They were portrayed as a vast hierarchy extending from the highest peaks of the Ploma down to the edges of the material world. The closer an Aeon was to the line, the more involved it was in the act of spiritual awakening. Some, like Christ, descended into the world to wake people up. Others, like Sophia, became involved in the fight between divine knowledge and the lies of the Demiurge. The Aeon didn't come here to create religions. They came here to destroy them. Because religion as we know it was designed to replace noise, the early church took the idea of salvation and turned it into obedience. They cut humanity off from the true role of the Aeon, naming them as heretical lies while installing the Demiurge version of God as the only authority. But the writings that survive tell a different story. The Pistis. Sophia shows how the Aeons worked together to send messengers into the material world, people who weren't prophets, weren't rulers, but leaders. The Valentinian school thought that certain people carried an inner spark of divine birth, a fragment of the lost Ploma itself. These people, if they could recognize their true nature, would be able to avoid the false structures of this world and ascend back to where they truly belonged. Sophia wasn't supposed to make a mistake. She was an Aeon, one of the highest emanations of divine intelligence, the embodiment of wisdom itself. But in the Gnostic books, wisdom isn't just about knowing facts, it's about understanding the structure of truth. And somewhere along the way, Sophia miscalculated. She acted without her counterpart, without the balance that the Aeons were meant to maintain. She tried to make something on her own away from the Ploma, separate from the divine order, and that single moment, her lopsided act of creation ripped through the cosmic framework like a rapture in space-time. What emerged wasn't divine. It wasn't even fully conscious. It was a failure, a cosmic accident that never should have existed, and that accident became the Demiurge. This is where things get ugly, because the Demiurge wasn't just some deformed piece of creation. He was blind. He had no memory of the true holy order. He didn't know where he came from. He didn't even know that something greater existed. But like any other being suddenly thrown into existence, he started looking for meaning. And in his blindness, he came to a terrifying conclusion. I must be God. This was the biggest disaster in cosmic history. The Demiurge didn't just believe he was God. He announced it as truth, and because he didn't have access to the Ploma, he did the only thing he could. He built his own false image of reality, the material world. This is where we live, a world, not born from divine balance, but from misunderstanding, from an illusion of godhood made by a being that never should have existed. And because the Demiurge was blind to the real source of life, everything he made was evil by design. Decay, death, hunger, pain. These weren't accidental, they were part of the system, a system built by a false god who thought himself to be supreme. But Sophia, she knew what had happened. She saw her mistake, and instead of abandoning this broken piece of reality, she fell into it. This is where the story diverges from mainstream religion in most traditions. The divine stays distant, watching from above, delivering commandments from on high. But Sophia didn't do that. She didn't judge from afar. She fell, she entered the system, and in doing so she became the first rebel against the Demiurge rule. Different Gnostic traditions tell this part in different ways. Some say Sophia's descent led to her being stuck within the material world, divided and bound in human souls, meaning that every single person carries a piece of her divine essence waiting to be freed. Others say she took on a mask, working within the false system to implant information where she could hidden messages, times of revelation, whispers of truth masked as myth, but no matter the version, the end result is the same. Sophia became the enemy of the Demiurge not because she sought power, but because she knew the truth, because she understood that this world, the world he claimed as his product, was nothing more than a faulty copy of something infinitely bigger, and because she had the one thing that could destroy his illusion: knowledge. The Gospel of Thomas should have changed everything. It should have shattered the illusion, exposed the lies, and rewritten history. But instead it was buried, literally hidden in a clay jar in Nagham, left unharmed for nearly 1,600 years. Why? Because this single text, more than any other, contained something that organized religion could never accept: a direct, unedited record of what the real lessons of Christ might have been, and they are nothing like what we were told. There are no miracles in the Gospel of Thomas, no virgin birth, no death, no resurrection. There's no doctrine about sin, no commands to obey religious government, no promise that a church or a priest will save you instead. It's a collection of sayings, 114 cryptic statements credited to Jesus and the message. It's the exact opposite of what mainstream Christianity became. Salvation isn't about faith. It's not about worship. It's not even about Jesus himself. It's about knowledge. It's about something hidden inside of you, something you have to find for yourself. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you have will kill you. Saying 70. Think about that for a second. That's not the voice of a tyrant. God demanding obedience. That's not a lesson about sin and punishment. That's a warning, a challenge, a test. The truth isn't something you're given. It's something you have to find, and if you fail to find it, you stay stuck. This is exactly what the Gnostics held, that the material world was a deception, a jail built to keep humanity blind, and that the only way out was through gnosis, straight personal knowledge of the divine, not belief, not faith knowledge. That's why the Gospel of Thomas is so dangerous. It doesn't tell you to believe in Jesus. It tells you to become like Jesus. He who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I myself will become. He's saying 108, that right there. That's a death sentence for organized religion. If every person carries the divine within them, if safety comes from within instead of from obedience, then what is the goal of priests, of churches, of religious hierarchies? There is none. The entire power structure falls, and that is why this gospel was erased. It was called heresy, condemned by the early church fathers, and deliberately wiped from history, because it directly threatened the power of those who claimed to be the gatekeepers of rescue. But it didn't completely vanish. Some of its ideas survived, hidden in mystical customs, in underground groups, in the whispers of those who knew that the media version of history was a fabrication. And in 1945, the original text resurfaced, unchanged, wild, and still just as dangerous as ever. Because if the Gospel of Thomas is right, then everything we've been told about religion is a lie. You don't need to be saved by an alien god. You don't need to bow, follow, or wait for in future. The kingdom of heaven isn't in the sky, isn't in a church, isn't something you get after you die. It's already here. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are the kids of the living Father. Saying 3 Valentinus was a threat. He wasn't just another theologian. He wasn't a fringe mystic raving in secret for a time. He was one of the most famous Christian scholars of the 2nd century, so respected in fact that he was almost named Bishop of Rome. Imagine that a man who believed that the God of the Bible wasn't the true highest power, who taught that rescue came from understanding, not loyalty, nearly became the leader of the entire church. The only reason he didn't, because his idea of Christianity didn't serve the system, it destroyed it. The Valentinian worldview wasn't just an alternative interpretation of text, it was a total restructuring of reality. According to Valentinus, the world wasn't made by a single supreme deity, but by 30 aeon divine emanations that existed in balance within the pleroma, the realm of pure spirit. These aeons weren't separate gods, but features of the infinite source branches of divine thought itself. And then came the catastrophe, the breach that led to the development of the material world, a broken copy of divine perfection. The Demiurge, the fake creator, was just a byproduct of that split. He wasn't evil in the way popular religion depicts. The devil White was something worse. He was ignorant. He genuinely thought he was the only God, and he built this world as a flawed image of his own misunderstanding of God. And just like that, the lie of organized religion was exposed, because if the Demi wasn't the true source of creation, then the laws of this world, signed suffering, death, weren't the result of divine will. They were the result of a cosmic mistake, and that meant that redemption wasn't about following rules or worshiping a god. It was about escaping the false structure of truth itself. This was the core of Valentinian thought. Humanity wasn't meant to be saved. Humanity was meant to wake up, to break free from the mirage of the Demiurge's power and the way out. It wasn't through trust, it wasn't through ritual, it was through gnosis, the direct knowledge of the divine fact that the Demiurge had buried beneath layers of fraud. This wasn't some vague occult philosophy. Valentinus laid it out in a structured logical method. He described how the aeon functioned, how their relationship shaped the structure of truth, and how the material world was a corrupted copy of the higher world. He even had a clear explanation for salvation, something he called the 3 types of people, according to Valentinian teachings. Humanity was split into 3 groups: the Hilks, who were completely material, lost in misunderstanding and physical desire; the prophets, who had some knowledge of the divine but were still caught by the laws of religion and the Demiurge deception; and then at the top level, the Pneumatics, those who carried within them a direct link to the true divine source. These were the ones who could break free, who could see through the fantasy, who could escape the false system and return to the pleroma. But here's the part that really made him dangerous. Valentinus wasn't saying that people needed a church, a priest, or an institution to access this information. He taught that this divine spark was already inside certain people. They just had to realize it, and once they did, they were beyond control. Everything you've been told about the nature of truth, about who you are and where you come from, has been filtered, rewritten, and built to keep you from asking the right questions. The Gnostics understood this. Over 1,500 years ago, they saw the prison for what it was. And they weren't waiting for safety from a God who never meant to set them free. They were looking for a way out. Because here's the harsh truth: if you don't know you're in a cage, you'll never try to escape. And that's exactly how this method is planned. You're born into a world that teaches you what's real, what's possible, what to believe, and how to live. You're handed a script and told to follow it. Go to school, get a job, obey the laws, follow the rules. Pray to the approved God, and never under any circumstances question the nature of the world around you. This is the illusion, a controlled reality created by a force that needs you to stay asleep. The Demiurge, the fake God, doesn't rule through force, he rules through ignorance, because as long as you never understand the truth, you'll never challenge the system. You'll accept pain as part of the divine plan, You'll obey the rules of a world that was never meant to exist in the first place. And worst of all, you'll never know that you are not some faraway god, not some ancient messiah, not some religious institution, are the key to your own freedom. This is what the lost Aeons were trying to tell. The Gnostics didn't believe in blind faith. They believed in knowledge gnosis. Because knowledge is the only thing that breaks the fantasy. When you begin to see through the lies, when you recognize the patterns, when you understand that the forces controlling this world are not on your side. Everything changes. The texts that survive the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John Pistis, Sophia, they weren't written to convert fans. They were written to leave clues for those who were ready to question everything, because not everyone is. Some people will fight to protect the very system that enslaves them. Some people would rather live in a comfortable fantasy than face the frightening truth that their entire world is built on deception. But for those who are ready, the knowledge is still there, hidden in pieces, buried in hidden texts, encoded in myths and images, waiting for the ones who refuse to stay blind. And that's why these ideas are so dangerous, because once you start seeing the fact, you can't unsee it. Once you start recognizing the trends, you can't go back to believing in the lie. The Gnostics weren't just philosophers, they were rebels. They stood against the entire religious and political order of their time because they refused to be controlled. And that's why their information was wiped from history, because they weren't just giving a different way to think. They were offering a way out. And if you've made it this far, if you're still watching, still listening, then maybe, just maybe, you're starting to see it too. Thank you for watching.